The billionaire stood alone in her corner office at 9 p.m., and she was crying over someone else's family photos. Alan Ford had seen Janice Watson close billion-dollar deals, transform failing companies into industry leaders, and command rooms full of skeptical investors with nothing but her vision and relentless charisma, but he had never seen her vulnerable. Not until tonight, not until she caught him watching through the glass. What she whispered changed everything. 8 words that shattered the careful distance between invisible employees and untouchable executives. Between survival and connection, between the man everyone overlooked and the woman everyone worshipped but no one truly knew. Some people hide to stay safe. Others hide because no one's looking anyway. If you're ready to discover what happens when two people built entirely from protective armor finally let someone see what's underneath, stay with me until the end. And if this story resonates with you, hit that like button and drop a comment telling me what keeps you up at night, ambition, regret, or the person you're afraid to become. I love hearing your truth. Being forgettable was an art form, and Alan Ford had mastered it 3 years ago out of necessity. The day after Sarah's funeral, when he'd walked back into Watson Technologies with an 8-month-old daughter and a paycheck he couldn't afford to lose, he'd made a calculated decision. Survive. Not thrive, not advance, not climb. Just survive with enough stability to be the father Emma deserved. That meant delivering solid work without fanfare, leaving at 5:30 p.m. sharp every single day, and cultivating the kind of professional invisibility that kept him safely beneath the radar of corporate politics and late-night emergencies. Tonight, the Watson Technologies headquarters sat almost empty, exactly the way Alan needed it to be, temporarily. The security guard had waved him through with barely a glance, accustomed to the occasional parent returning for forgotten items. The elevators hummed their after-hours hum, a quieter frequency than their daytime chaos. His shoes made soft sounds against the polished floors as he moved through the dimly lit project management wing, past cubicles decorated with the evidence of other people's whole lives. Vacation photos, kids' artwork, motivational quotes taped to monitors. Alan's desk held exactly 3 items: his computer, a photo of Emma in a silver frame, and a stapler. Nothing suggested he existed beyond the 9 to 5 boundaries he'd drawn in permanent marker around his life. Emma's science homework sat exactly where she'd left it that afternoon when she'd visited him during her after-school program's field trip to see where Daddy works. A folder decorated with crayon drawings of the solar system. Her presentation on Mars is due tomorrow morning. She'd been so excited to show her classmates that she'd nearly left it behind in his filing cabinet. He could picture her face when he got home without it, not angry, never angry, but that careful disappointment she'd learned too young, the one that said she was trying hard not to be a burden. He grabbed the folder, felt the small weight of it, the tangible proof that he was doing this right. Being there. Being present. Being enough. The executive corridor stretched beyond the project management floor, separated by frosted glass doors that required keycard access Alan didn't have. But from where he stood, the view was unobstructed. Floor-to-ceiling windows lined the top floor, and through them, the city spread out like a circuit board, all light and geometry and the illusion of order. That's when he saw the light still burning in the corner office. The corner office. Janice Watson's domain, the place where quarterly earnings were decided, and company futures were written. It should have been dark. Executives didn't work late. They had people for that, people like Alan, who transformed strategic visions into project timelines and deliverables while the decision-makers attended galas and industry conferences. Alan should have left. Should have walked straight to the elevator, gone home to Emma, microwaved dinner, and helped her rehearse her presentation about Martian soil composition. That was the deal he'd made with himself, with Sarah's memory, with the universe that had taken his wife and left him terrified of wanting anything beyond baseline survival. But something made him stop. Maybe it was the unusual sight of executive-level lights at 9 p.m. Maybe it was the 3 years of invisibility finally wearing thin in places he hadn't noticed. Maybe it was just human curiosity, that base instinct that makes people slow down at accident scenes even when they know they shouldn't look. He moved closer to the frosted glass, positioned himself at an angle where he could see into the top floor without being immediately obvious. The corner office had walls of glass on two sides, one overlooking the city, another facing the internal corridor. Watson Technologies had been designed for transparency, for the appearance of openness and accessibility. Which meant that from where Alan stood, partially concealed behind a support column, he could see directly into Janice Watson's private space. She sat at her desk, but not in the commanding posture he'd seen in company meetings and quarterly presentations. Her shoulders curved inward, her head bent over something in her hands. Her phone. She was staring at her phone with an expression that made Alan's chest tighten with recognition because he'd worn that same expression 1,000 times in the past 3 years. Profound, aching loneliness. Janice Watson. The woman whose net worth exceeded that of some small nation's GDP. The CEO, whose confident smile had launched 1,000 magazine covers and inspired a generation of female entrepreneurs. The leader who'd built Watson Technologies from a struggling mid-tier firm into a Fortune 500 powerhouse. She was crying. Not the pretty, single tear down the cheek crying of movies. Real crying. The kind that came from somewhere deep and true and impossible to perform. Her hand moved across the phone screen, scrolling through photos, Alan realized. Family photos, probably. People she loved. People who weren't there. He should have left. This was the definition of none of his business. But Alan Ford, who had perfected the art of being invisible, who had chosen safety over every other consideration for 3 solid years, found himself frozen in place. Because he understood. God help him, he understood exactly what that kind of loneliness looked like. She looked up. Their eyes met through 2 layers of glass and 30 feet of corporate space that might as well have been the Grand Canyon. For one suspended moment, Alan watched the realization cross her face, she'd been caught. Seen. Not in the performance of the CEO, but in the raw truth underneath. He expected her to turn away. To close the blinds. To pretend it hadn't happened, the way people do when someone witnesses them at their most vulnerable. Instead, Janice Watson did something that changed everything. She stood. She walked to her office door, the one that opened to the interior corridor. She opened it, he heard the sound even from where he stood, the soft click of the latch releasing. And then she did something that made Alan's carefully constructed world tilt on its axis. She walked out of her office, across the executive floor, to the frosted glass doors that separated her world from his. She pressed her keycard to the reader. The lock disengaged with a soft beep. The door opened. And Janice Watson, billionaire CEO of Watson Technologies, stood there in a vibrant yellow blazer that somehow made her look both powerful and achingly human, her eyes slightly red but steady. She looked at Alan Ford, the man everyone forgot, the widowed father who'd chosen invisibility as a survival strategy, and she whispered 8 words that would shatter both their protective armor forever. If you want a closer look, just ask. She wasn't talking about the office. Or the view. Or even the photos on her phone. She was talking about her. The real her. The woman behind the billion-dollar empire, behind the magazine covers, behind the performance of invincibility that her position demanded. Alan's throat felt tight. Emma's homework folder crinkled in his hand. Every instinct screamed at him to politely decline, to retreat, to protect the fragile stability he'd built. He had a daughter depending on him. A job he couldn't risk. A life designed specifically to avoid complications like this. But standing there, looking at Janice Watson's expectant, vulnerable, terrifyingly honest face, Alan Ford made a choice that would either save them both or destroy everything they'd carefully constructed. "I'd like that," he said. And the distance between them, between invisible and untouchable, between hiding and being hidden, between two people who'd forgotten what it felt like to be truly seen, collapsed into something dangerous, honest, and impossibly real. Alan Ford had perfected invisibility the way other men perfected golf swings or investment portfolios, through relentless, deliberate practice born from necessity. 3 years ago, when Sarah's heart had simply stopped during what should have been a routine morning jog, Alan had been left with a 5-month-old daughter, a mortgage, and the terrifying realization that he was now the only thing standing between Emma and catastrophe. The math was simple and brutal. He needed his job at Watson Technologies, which meant he needed to be reliable, competent, and above all, forgettable. So he'd engineered it. He arrived at 8:30 a.m., left at 5:30 p.m., never a minute later. He delivered projects on time, under budget, with zero drama. He didn't volunteer for high-visibility assignments. He didn't attend happy hours or company softball games. He didn't make friends, because friends asked you to stay late for urgent deadlines or cover their shifts during family emergencies, and Alan couldn't afford either. His colleagues knew him as solid and dependable, the professional equivalent of beige wallpaper. Exactly what he'd intended. Emma was 8 now, all dark curls and Sarah's sharp intelligence, thriving despite everything Alan feared he was getting wrong. She had friends, good grades, and a smile that still came easily. Every morning, he packed her lunch with the precision of a military operation. Every afternoon, he picked her up from school at 3:45 p.m. sharp. Every evening, they had dinner together at the kitchen table, no phones, no distractions, just the two of them against the world. On weekends, they went to the park, the library, and the science museum, which she loved. It wasn't the life he'd imagined, but it was stable. Safe. Enough. The cost of that stability was everything else. Alan had stopped going to Sarah's book club, stopped calling old friends, stopped imagining any version of his future that included want or desire or risk. He was 34 years old and felt 50, his entire existence compressed into a narrow corridor labeled, adequate father, adequate employee. Some nights, after Emma fell asleep, he'd sit in the dark living room and wonder if this was victory or surrender. Then he'd remember her laugh, her excitement over a good grade, the way she still reached for his hand when they crossed streets, and he'd decide it didn't matter. This was the deal. This was survival. Janice Watson existed in a different universe entirely. Alan saw her maybe twice a year, quarterly all-hands meetings where she commanded the stage with the kind of effortless charisma that made 600 employees believe they were part of something revolutionary. She wore power like other people wore perfume, subtle but undeniable. Forbes had called her the architect of impossible turnarounds. TechCrunch referred to her as the woman who taught Silicon Valley that empathy and profit aren't enemies. She'd taken Watson Technologies from near bankruptcy to a market cap exceeding $12 billion in 7 years. She dated movie producers and sat on non-profit boards, and gave TED Talks about leadership that went viral within hours. Alan had watched one once, late at night when he couldn't sleep. She'd talked about resilience, about building something meaningful from failure, about the responsibility that came with power. Her smile had been radiant, her confidence absolute. She'd looked like someone who'd never doubted herself for a single moment. He'd envied that certainty. That armor. That ability to stand in front of the world and project exactly what you wanted them to see. He hadn't known, then, that armor and invisibility were just different versions of the same terrified choice. The door closed behind Alan with a soft click that felt unnaturally loud in the silence of the executive floor. Janice Watson stood 3 feet away, close enough that he could see the mascara smudged beneath her eyes, the way her hands trembled slightly as she clutched her phone. Up close, without the buffer of distance and glass, she looked smaller than she did on stage. More human. More breakable. "I wasn't spying," Alan said, the words automatic, defensive. "I came back for my daughter's homework. I saw the light and he stopped, because what could he say? I watched you cry because I recognized the loneliness. I know, Janice said quietly. Her voice carried none of the commanding presence he'd heard in meetings, none of the polished confidence from her TED Talks. This voice was raw, tired. Real. She held up her phone, the screen still glowing. Do you want to see what I was looking at? Alan should have declined. Should have made an excuse, grabbed Emma's homework, and fled back to the safe predictability of his carefully controlled life. Instead, he heard himself say, I'd like that. Janice's smile was small and sad. She turned the phone toward him. The screen showed a photo of two teenagers, a boy and a girl, maybe 16 and 14, standing on either side of a younger version of Janice. They weren't smiling at the camera. They were looking away, their body language screaming resentment. My children, she said. Mason's 24 now. Lives in Portland. We haven't spoken in 8 months. Sophia's 22, in grad school at Yale. She sends me birthday cards. Very polite ones. She swiped to the next photo. An older woman with Janice's eyes and a warm smile, standing in a kitchen. My mother. She died 5 years ago. I was in Tokyo, closing a deal. I missed her last 3 days because I thought there'd be more time. Her voice cracked on the last word. There's always supposed to be more time. Alan's chest felt tight. He thought about Emma's homework in his hand, about the way he'd raced back here because missing her presentation tomorrow was unthinkable. About all the things he'd given up to make sure he never missed a single moment that mattered. My wife died 3 years ago, he said, and was surprised by how steady his voice sounded. Sarah. Heart defect no one knew about. She went for a morning run and just didn't come back. Emma was 5 months old. Janice's eyes filled with fresh tears. I'm so sorry. I have a photo too. Alan pulled out his phone with his free hand and navigated to his home screen. Emma's face beamed up at them, gap-toothed and radiant, holding a trophy from her school science fair. She's 8 now. Smart as hell, braver than I'll ever be. Everything I do is for her. Every single thing. She's beautiful, Janice whispered. You're lucky. I know. Alan looked at Janice's phone again, at the photos of children who'd grown up resenting their mother's ambition, at the evidence of a woman who'd won the world and lost everything that mattered. But so were you, once. Before the company. Before all of this. I thought I was building something for them, Janice said, her voice breaking. I thought success meant security, meant giving them opportunities one never had. I didn't realize I was trading their childhood for quarterly earnings. She laughed, but it sounded like grief. I'm a billionaire, Alan. I have power, influence, and respect. And I'm so goddamn lonely I can't remember the last time someone looked at me and saw a person instead of a brand. The words hung between them, honest and terrible and true. Alan thought about his own loneliness, the way he'd chosen isolation as armor, the night sitting in the dark, wondering if surviving was the same as living. Same loneliness, he said softly. Different reason. You hid behind success. I hid behind being invisible. But we're both, he stopped, searching for the right word. Terrified, Janice finished. Terrified that if we stop performing, stop protecting ourselves, everything will fall apart. Their eyes met, and something shifted. Recognition. Understanding. The walls they'd both built so carefully, cracking just enough to let in light. Thank you, Janice said. For staying. For listening. For not pretending you didn't see. Thank you, Alan replied, for asking. They moved to Janice's office without discussion, as if the hallway was too exposed for the kind of honesty that was spilling out of both of them. Janice gestured to the leather chairs facing her desk, but neither of them sat. Instead, they stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows, the city sprawling below them like a constellation of other people's lives, other people's choices. Mason was 12 when I missed his birthday, Janice said, her reflection ghostly in the glass. Not just the party, the entire day. I was in Singapore, negotiating the Chen acquisition. $300 million. I told myself it was for him, for his future, for his college fund. He told me, years later, that he would have traded every dollar for one day where I actually showed up. Alan said nothing, just listened, because sometimes that was the only gift you could give. Sophia stopped inviting me to things when she was 14. School plays, volleyball games, parent-teacher conferences. She said it was easier not to hope I'd come than to sit there watching the door, waiting for a mother who never arrived. Janice's voice wavered. She was right. I didn't come. There was always a meeting, a crisis, a deal that couldn't wait. Except they all could have waited. I just didn't choose to make them wait. She turned from the window to face Alan directly. Her eyes were red-rimmed but clear, no longer trying to hide behind CEO composure. Their father, my ex-husband David, he was a good man. Patient. He tried to make me see what I was sacrificing. But I thought he was being small-minded, afraid of my ambition. I thought he didn't understand that I was building something important. She laughed bitterly. He understood perfectly. He was trying to save our family, and I was too busy saving the company. When did he leave? Alan asked quietly. He didn't leave. I did. Janice pressed her palm against the glass, as if she could touch the city beyond it. I moved out when Sophia was 16. Told myself it was better for everyone, less fighting, less tension. The truth? I chose the company. Explicitly, consciously. I chose board meetings over bedtime stories. I chose quarterly earnings over basketball games. And by the time I realized what I'd done, my children were strangers who shared my last name and nothing else. Alan thought about Emma, about the 3 years he'd spent building his entire existence around being present for her. About the career advancement he'd deliberately avoided, the opportunities he'd passed up, the life he'd compressed into that narrow corridor of adequate father, adequate employee. He'd thought his choice was cowardice. Maybe it was wisdom. Do they know you regret it? He asked. I've tried to tell them. Mason won't take my calls. Sophia is polite, like I said. We have lunch twice a year where we talk about her research and the weather and absolutely nothing that matters. She treats me like a distant and she's obligated to stay in touch with. Janice's voice broke. I built a $12 billion company, Alan. I've been on the cover of Fortune. I've given commencement speeches about success and leadership. And my own children can't stand to be in the same room with me for more than an hour. She looked at him then, really looked at him, and her expression was raw with something that looked like desperation. I don't know how to be close to people anymore. I don't know how to want something without calculating its ROI. I don't know how to just be. Without performing, without strategy, without the armor. She paused, and when she spoke again, her voice was barely a whisper. Except right now. With you. I don't know why, but I don't feel like I have to perform. I can just be honest. Alan felt something crack open in his chest, something he'd kept carefully sealed for 3 years. Maybe, he said slowly, it's because we're both terrified of the same thing. That if we're honest, if we're real, we'll lose what little we have left. And yet here we are, Janice said. Being honest anyway. Here we are, Alan agreed. Alan walked to the other side of Janice's office, creating distance not from her but from the intensity of what she'd just shared. He found himself staring at a framed photo on her credenza, Janice receiving some award, surrounded by applauding executives, her smile radiant and hollow. He understood that smile now. The performance of success masking the cost of it. I made a different choice, he said, his back still to her. After Sarah died, I could have kept climbing. My boss at the time, Jenkins, he actually told me I had VP potential. Said my analytical skills were exceptional, that I could run a whole division if I wanted it. He turned to face Janice. I didn't want it. I wanted to make sure Emma never felt what your children felt. What I felt growing up, actually. My father worked oil rigs, gone for months at a time. I barely knew him. So you chose her, Janice said. It wasn't a question. I chose survival, Alan corrected. I chose a life so small and controlled that nothing could threaten it. I became the most unremarkable person in every room. I stopped having opinions in meetings. I stopped networking, stopped pursuing promotions, stopped existing as anything except competent and forgettable. He sat down finally, in one of her leather chairs, suddenly exhausted by the weight of his own confession. I told myself it was noble. Sacrificing my career for my daughter. But the truth is darker than that. Janice sat across from him, leaning forward. Tell me. I was terrified, Alan said simply. Sarah's death proved that everything can disappear in an instant. Love, security, the future you planned, gone. Just gone. So I decided the only way to protect Emma was to need nothing, want nothing, risk nothing. If I never reached for more, I could never lose more. If I stayed invisible, life couldn't target me again. But that's not protection, Janice said softly. That's just a different kind of prison. I know. Alan rubbed his face with both hands. Emma's 8 now, and she's wonderful, happy, adjusted, thriving. But sometimes I look at her and I wonder what I'm teaching her. That wanting things is dangerous. That love means shrinking yourself down until you disappear. That the world is so terrifying you should never, ever risk being seen. They sat in silence for a moment, the city lights below them indifferent to their shared revelation. We're the same, Janice said finally. You're hiding by being invisible. I'm hiding behind success. But we're both hiding. Both convinced that wanting anything beyond what we've decided is safe will destroy us. You lost your family by reaching too far, Alan said. I'm losing myself by not reaching at all. Two sides of the same fear, Janice agreed. That connection is dangerous. That needing people, wanting people, letting them see you, it's all just a countdown to inevitable loss. Alan thought about the past 3 years, about the careful walls he'd built, about the nights in the dark living room wondering if survival was enough. About Emma's face when she'd asked him last month why he never went on dates like her friend Sophie's dad. Don't you want someone to be happy with, Daddy? She'd asked, and he'd changed the subject because he didn't know how to explain that wanting someone meant risking everything. I thought I was doing the right thing, he said. Being there for Emma, being reliable, being safe. But maybe I've just been teaching her that love is something to survive, not something to live for. And I taught my children that success matters more than they do, Janice said. We both failed, Alan. Just in opposite directions. So what do we do? Alan asked. Keep failing. Or risk failing differently. Janice met his eyes, and he saw his own fear reflected back at him, and something else. Something that looked dangerously like hope. I don't know, she whispered. But I think I want to find out. They talked until nearly midnight that first night, sitting in Janice's office like two people who'd forgotten how to have real conversations and were desperately making up for lost time. When Alan finally left, Emma's homework clutched in his hand, he felt lighter and more terrified than he had in 3 years. He'd been seen. Actually seen. And he hadn't disintegrated. The next morning, back in his beige cubicle, reality reasserted itself with brutal clarity. Janice Watson was his CEO. The power dynamics alone made any kind of relationship, even friendship, catastrophically complicated. If anyone found out they'd spent 3 hours talking in her office, the rumors would be immediate and career-ending. Alan could already imagine the whispers, the nobody project manager sleeping his way to advancement, the desperate widower manipulating the lonely billionaire. HR would be involved. His job would be at risk. Emma's stability, the one thing he'd sacrificed everything to protect, would crumble. He should have stopped it there. Should have returned to his carefully constructed invisibility and pretended that night had never happened. But Janice sent him an email at 10:47 a.m. The subject line read, "Thank you," and the message was brief, "For listening. For being honest. For not treating me like a brand. J." Alan stared at those 3 sentences for 5 full minutes before replying, "Thank you for asking." That should have been the end. Instead, it was the beginning. They started meeting in the early mornings, before the office filled, in a small conference room on the 3rd floor that nobody used. Officially, they were discussing strategic project alignment. Actually, they were talking about everything else: books, music, the weight of grief, the particular loneliness of doing everything right and still feeling like you're failing. Janice told him about the philanthropy work she actually cared about, the one her board considered a waste of time. Alan told her about Emma's obsession with black holes and how he'd been reading astrophysics papers he barely understood just to keep up with her questions. 6 weeks after that first night, Watson Technologies held its annual Family Day, a corporate obligation Janice usually delegated. This year, she showed up. Alan saw her across the lawn where employees' children ran through sprinklers and consumed alarming quantities of ice cream. Their eyes met. She smiled, tentative and real, and started walking toward him. Emma was building an elaborate sandcastle nearby, her tongue poking out in concentration the way it always did when she was focused. Alan's heart hammered as Janice approached, terrified and hopeful in equal measure. "You must be Emma," Janice said, crouching down to the girl's level with none of the awkwardness most executives showed around children. "Your dad tells me you're a scientist." Emma looked up, assessing this stranger with the brutal honesty of 8-year-olds. "I like space," she said. "Black holes mostly. They're sad." "Sad?" Janice's eyebrow raised. "They're lonely. They pull everything in, but nothing can ever get out. They just keep eating and never stop being hungry." Emma tilted her head, studying Janice with unsettling intensity. "You have sad eyes like Daddy used to. Did you lose someone, too?" The world seemed to stop. Alan watched Janice's face transform, surprise, then recognition, then something that looked like being understood by someone who had no reason to pretend otherwise. "Yes," Janice said quietly. "I lost some people. People I loved very much. Daddy lost Mommy," Emma said matter-of-factly. "But he's not as sad now. Are you getting less sad, too?" Janice glanced at Alan, and the look that passed between them contained entire conversations they'd never had out loud. About healing, about risk, about the terrifying possibility that maybe, just maybe, they could both stop performing their carefully constructed roles and just be human together. "I think I might be," Janice told Emma. "Your dad's been helping with that." Emma smiled, gap-toothed and brilliant. "Good. He needs people, too. He pretends he doesn't, but he does." Out of the mouths of children, Alan thought, comes the truth adults spend years avoiding. He met Janice's eyes again, and they both knew, whatever this was between them, it had just become real in a way that couldn't be taken back. Everything had changed. And terrifying as it was, neither of them wanted to go back. Marcus Reed had built his career on noticing what others missed. The subtle shift in a competitor's strategy. The hesitation in a board member's voice signaled wavering support. The exact moment when someone's armor developed a crack, you could exploit. It was a useful skill for a COO positioning himself to become CEO, and Marcus had been positioning himself for years. So when Janice Watson walked into the executive leadership meeting on Tuesday morning with something different in her eyes, not happiness exactly, but a softness that hadn't been there in the 2 years since she'd rejected his carefully calculated romantic overture, Marcus noticed immediately. She'd turned him down gently, professionally, citing the complications of workplace relationships and her focus on the company. Marcus had accepted it with grace, even as rage simmered beneath his smile. He'd been perfect for her, equally ambitious, equally brilliant, equally willing to prioritize Watson Technologies above all else. They could have been a corporate dynasty. Instead, she'd chosen loneliness, or so he'd thought. But something had changed. Janice smiled more in that single meeting than she had in months. She made a joke, an actual joke, about the marketing department's obsession with acronyms. She seemed present in an almost unsettling way, as if she'd suddenly remembered she was a human being and not just a boardroom weapon. Marcus's instincts, honed through 15 years of corporate warfare, screamed that someone had caused this change. Someone had gotten through Janice Watson's carefully constructed walls. Which meant someone had access that Marcus had been denied. He started paying attention. Janice left early on Thursday, unheard of. She took a full lunch break on Friday instead of eating at her desk. She hummed in the elevator. She actually hummed. Marcus began his investigation the way he approached all problems, methodically, quietly, with plausible deniability built in at every step. He reviewed security footage from the executive floor, noting the late nights when lights stayed on longer than usual. He checked Janice's calendar through her assistant's system access, looking for patterns. He monitored conference room reservations. And there it was. Conference Room 3C, reserved under Strategic Project Alignment every Tuesday and Thursday at 7 a.m. for the past 6 weeks. Reserved by Janice herself, which was unusual. CEOs didn't book their own conference rooms. The other attendee listed was Alan Ford, Project Management, Level 4. Alan Ford. Marcus pulled up his file. Mid-level project manager, unremarkable performance reviews, widowed, single father. The kind of employee who showed up, did adequate work, and left on time every day. Invisible. Forgettable. Except Janice Watson wasn't forgetting him. Marcus spent the next week gathering information. Alan Ford had been at Watson Technologies for 6 years, consistently rated as, meets expectations, corporate speak for utterly mediocre. No disciplinary issues, no notable achievements, no ambition beyond maintaining his current position. He had an 8-year-old daughter named Emma, drove a 7-year-old Honda, and lived in a modest townhouse in the suburbs. On paper, he was the least threatening person in the entire company. Which made him perfect. Perfect for what Marcus was beginning to suspect. Perfect for the trap Marcus was beginning to formulate. Because here was the thing about ambitious COOs who'd been building their path to CEO for years, they understood leverage. And Alan Ford, with his daughter and his precarious work-life balance and his complete lack of corporate protection, was all leverage and no defense. Marcus watched them at the Family Day event, saw the way Janice crouched down to talk to the little girl, the way Alan looked at Janice like she was something precious and breakable. He saw vulnerability. Weakness. Opportunity. Janice had rejected Marcus because she claimed relationships complicated leadership. But here she was, getting emotionally entangled with an employee so far beneath her status it was almost laughable. The board would be appalled. Shareholders would question her judgment. And Marcus would be there, stable and reliable, ready to step in when her little romance inevitably imploded and took her credibility with it. He just needed to help that implosion along. Carefully. Strategically. His fingerprints were nowhere near the detonation. Marcus opened a new encrypted file on his personal laptop and began taking notes. Every meeting. Every interaction. Every piece of evidence that Watson Technology's brilliant CEO was letting her personal life compromise her professional judgment. He smiled as he typed. Janice Watson had made her choice 2 years ago. Now, Marcus would make sure she lived with the consequences. The email arrived at 6:47 a.m. on a Wednesday, 18 minutes before Alan was supposed to drop Emma at school. His phone buzzed on the kitchen counter while he was pouring cereal, and he almost ignored it. Work emails before 7 a.m. were never good news. But something made him look. From Human Resources, Watson Technologies. Subject: Mandatory attendance required, executive review meeting. Priority: urgent. Mr. Ford, your presence is required at an emergency meeting scheduled for 2 p.m. today in the executive boardroom, 15th floor. This meeting concerns matters of workplace conduct and potential policy violations. Attendance is mandatory. Please confirm receipt immediately. Alan's hand froze, cereal box suspended in midair. Workplace conduct. Policy violations. The words hit him like physical blows. Emma looked up from her math homework, sensing the shift in his mood with the terrifying perceptiveness of children who'd learned to read their parents' anxiety. Daddy? You okay? Fine, sweetheart, he lied, setting down the cereal with hands that wanted to shake. Just work stuff. Boring adult things. But it wasn't boring. It was catastrophic. Because Alan knew, with the sick certainty of someone who'd spent 3 years protecting his fragile stability, exactly what this was about. Someone had found out. Someone had noticed. Someone had turned his and Janice's careful, precious connection into evidence against them. His phone buzzed again. A text from Janice, just 3 words, "Did you get it?" "Yes," he typed back. "What's happening?" Her response took longer. Emergency shareholders meeting. Leadership fitness review. Marcus called it. "I'm so sorry, Alan. I'm so sorry." Alan's legs felt weak. He sat down at the kitchen table, across from Emma, who was watching him with worried eyes. An emergency shareholders meeting wasn't just serious, it was nuclear. Those were only called when the board believed the CEO's position was untenable, when leadership itself was being questioned. And somehow, impossibly, his name was attached to it. Marcus Reed. Of course it was Marcus Reed. Alan had seen the way the COO looked at Janice, had heard the office rumors about a rejected romantic advance 2 years ago. He'd even mentioned it to Janice once, carefully, and she'd waved it off. Marcus is ambitious, she'd said. But he's professional. It's ancient history. Apparently not ancient enough. Another email arrived, this one marked confidential. Alan opened it with shaking hands. Mr. Ford, please be advised that the meeting scheduled for 2 p.m. will address allegations of inappropriate workplace relationships, potential conflicts of interest, and concerns regarding the exploitation of your personal circumstances to gain favorable treatment from executive leadership. You have the right to bring legal representation. Documentation and evidence will be presented. Your employment status may be subject to review. The world tilted. Exploitation of personal circumstances. They were going to say he'd used Emma, used his widower status, to manipulate Janice. They were going to turn the most honest connection he'd felt in 3 years into something calculated and predatory. "Daddy, you're scaring me," Emma said, her voice small. Alan looked at his daughter, 8 years old, brilliant, innocent, his entire reason for every choice he'd made since Sarah died. He'd built his whole life around protecting her stability. And now, because he'd dared to want something beyond survival, because he'd let himself be seen by someone who actually understood his loneliness, everything was about to come crashing down. His phone rang. Janice. "Don't come to the meeting," she said immediately, her voice tight with barely controlled panic. "Alan, please. Let me handle this. If you're there, it makes everything worse. I can protect you if you just stay away. Protect me? Alan's laugh was bitter. Janice, we're past protection. They're calling it exploitation. They're going to say I used my daughter to manipulate you. They're going to destroy both of us. Then let them destroy me, Janice said fiercely. You have Emma. You have everything to lose. I'll take responsibility, I'll say it was inappropriate on my part, No. The word came out harder than Alan intended. No more hiding. No more performing. Isn't that what we promised each other? To stop being terrified? Silence on the other end. Then, quietly, I'm terrified now. Me too, Alan admitted. But I'm coming to that meeting. And we're going to face this together. Alan stood in the hallway outside the executive boardroom at 1:58 p.m. with Emma's small hand gripped tightly in his. He'd picked her up early from school, told her there was something important happening at work, something she needed to understand. She'd asked if Miss Janice was in trouble, because children always knew more than adults wanted them to, and Alan had simply said yes. Through the boardroom's glass wall, another architectural choice meant to signal transparency that now felt like cruelty, Alan could see the assembled shareholders and board members. Janice sat at the head of the table, her posture perfect, her face carefully composed. Marcus Reed stood at the presentation screen, a laser pointer in his hand and victory already gleaming in his eyes. A junior IT staffer had pulled up the security feed on a tablet for Alan, some small mercy from someone who'd heard the rumors and felt sympathy. Alan held it so Emma couldn't see the screen, but he could hear everything through the tablet speaker. Ladies and gentlemen, Marcus began, his voice smooth and reasonable, I've called this emergency meeting because I believe our CEO's judgment has become fundamentally compromised, putting Watson Technologies at significant legal and reputational risk. The first photo appeared on the screen. Alan and Janice are in conference room 3C, sitting close, her hand near his on the table. The angle made it look intimate, conspiratorial. The timestamp read 7:14 a.m. For the past 2 months, Marcus continued, Ms. Watson has been conducting secret early morning meetings with Alan Ford, a mid-level project manager. These meetings were not disclosed to HR, were not part of any legitimate business initiative, and represent a clear violation of our workplace relationship policies. Another photo. The family day. Janice crouched beside Emma, both of them smiling. Marcus had cropped it to remove other employees, making it look like a private moment, planned and deliberate. More concerning, Marcus said, his voice dropping into grave sincerity, is the evidence suggesting Mr. Ford has been strategically using his daughter and his widower status to manipulate Ms. Watson emotionally. He's cultivated a relationship with our CEO based on shared trauma and loneliness, with what appears to be the clear intention of securing favorable treatment and career advancement. That's not true, Janice said, her voice sharp. Marcus, this is. Is it not true that Mr. Ford has received no performance reviews in the past 2 months, despite company policy requiring quarterly evaluations? Marcus interrupted. Is it not true that his project received priority funding that was denied to 3 other departments? Is it not true that you personally intervened when his manager attempted to require additional hours for a critical deadline? Alan watched Janice's face on the screen. She looked cornered, defensive, exactly what Marcus wanted. The board members were leaning forward, their expressions ranging from concern to outright hostility. The question before us, Marcus said, is whether Ms. Watson's personal entanglement has compromised her ability to lead this company objectively and ethically. Whether she has allowed sentiment to override sound judgment. Whether Watson Technologies deserves leadership that puts the company first, or leadership that prioritizes inappropriate personal relationships. Emma tugged on Alan's sleeve. Daddy, why are they being mean about Miss Janice? Alan looked down at his daughter, at her confused, hurt expression. He thought about the 3 years he'd spent hiding, choosing invisibility, teaching her through his actions that safety mattered more than authenticity. He thought about Janice in that boardroom, alone, taking the hit for both of them because that's what her armor demanded. And he thought about what Sarah would have wanted him to teach their daughter. Not that love was dangerous. Not that wanting connection meant inviting destruction. But that some things, some people, were worth fighting for, even when it terrified you. They're being mean because they're scared, Alan told Emma. Scared that Miss Janice cares about someone more than she cares about her job. And they think that makes her weak. That's stupid, Emma said with the brutal clarity of 8-year-olds. Caring about people makes you strong. Alan looked at the tablet screen, at Janice sitting alone at that table, and made his choice. Not the safe choice. Not the invisible choice. The honest one. You're absolutely right, he said. Come on, sweetheart. Let's go show them what strong actually looks like. He took Emma's hand and walked toward the boardroom door. The boardroom door opened with a soft click that somehow cut through Marcus Reed's presentation like a gunshot. Every head turned. Alan Ford stood in the doorway, his hand firmly clasped around his daughter's, his heart hammering so hard he could feel it in his throat. But his voice, when he spoke, was steady. I'm sorry to interrupt, he said, looking directly at Marcus, then at the board members, then finally at Janice, whose eyes had gone wide with something between horror and hope. But I think if you're going to discuss my character and my intentions, I should probably be in the room. Mr. Ford, this is a closed shareholders' meeting, Marcus started, but Alan cut him off. And I'm the subject of your accusations. So I'm making it open. He walked into the room, Emma's hand still in his, and stood at the opposite end of the table from Marcus. I'm Alan Ford. I'm a project manager, level 4. I've worked here for 6 years. And this is my daughter, Emma. Emma waved shyly at the room full of intimidating adults. Several board members looked uncomfortable, as if the presence of a child had suddenly made their corporate warfare feel less righteous. For the record, Alan continued, his voice gaining strength, I haven't been manipulating anyone. I haven't been using my daughter to gain career advancement. I haven't been strategically exploiting shared trauma. He looked at Marcus directly. What I have been doing is getting to know an extraordinary person who happens to be my CEO. Someone brilliant, kind, and profoundly lonely. Someone who understood what it felt like to build walls so high you forget what it's like to let anyone in. Mr. Ford, the evidence clearly shows, Marcus tried again. The evidence shows 2 people having coffee at 7 a.m., Alan interrupted. The evidence shows your CEO being kind to an employee's child at a company event. What the evidence doesn't show is context, intention, or truth. It just shows what you wanted it to show. Janice stood up slowly. Alan, you don't have to. Yes, I do. He looked at her fully now, letting everyone in the room see exactly what he felt. Because for 3 years, I've been hiding. I've been invisible. I've been so terrified of losing what little stability I had that I forgot how to actually live. And then I met someone who was doing the same thing from the opposite direction, hiding behind success instead of invisibility, but hiding just the same. He turned back to the board. Ms. Watson didn't give me favorable treatment. She gave me honesty. She shared her life with me, the painful parts, the parts she doesn't put in TED Talks or earnings calls. And I shared mine with her. That's not manipulation. That's called being human. Emma tugged on his hand. She'd been quiet, taking everything in with those 2 perceptive eyes, but now she looked up at Marcus with the kind of direct, unfiltered assessment only children can manage. Why are you being mean? She asked him. Miss Janice is nice. She talks to me about space, and she has sad eyes like Daddy used to have. She's lonely like Daddy was lonely. Why is that bad? The room went absolutely silent. Marcus's expression flickered, just for a moment, revealing something ugly beneath his professional veneer. A board member, an older woman named Patricia Chen, whom Alan recognized from company photos, leaned forward. "That's an excellent question, sweetheart," Patricia said gently. Then, looking at Marcus with new skepticism, "Mr. Reed, is this really about company welfare? Or is this about something else entirely?" Marcus's jaw tightened. "I'm acting in the best interests of Watson Technologies." "You're acting in the best interests of Marcus Reed," Janice said, her voice clear and commanding now. She'd found her footing, or maybe Alan's presence had given it back to her. "You've been positioning yourself for CEO for 2 years. And when I didn't respond to your romantic interest the way you wanted, you decided to destroy anyone I might actually care about." "That's absurd," Marcus snapped, but his face had gone red. "Is it?" Patricia Chen looked at the other board members. "Because from where I'm sitting, this looks less like a legitimate concern about leadership fitness and more like a vindictive attack on a CEO who dared to develop a personal life." Another board member, James Rodriguez, nodded slowly. "Ms. Watson, have your personal feelings for Mr. Ford compromised any business decisions?" "Actual business decisions, not the selective examples Mr. Reed has presented?" "No," Janice said firmly. "Alan hasn't received special treatment. He hasn't asked for any. What he's done is remind me that I'm a human being, not just a corporate asset. And if that disqualifies me from leadership, then perhaps we need to reconsider what we actually value in our leaders." Patricia Chen looked at Alan, then at Emma, then at Janice. A small smile crossed her face. "I move that we vote confidence in Ms. Watson's continued leadership and dismiss these allegations as unfounded." "Seconded," James Rodriguez said immediately. The vote was 11-2. Marcus Reed's face had gone from red to ashen. Alan felt Emma squeeze his hand. Janice crossed the room and stood beside them, completing their small circle. Together, they walked out of the boardroom, not hidden, not performing, just whole. 3 people choosing honesty over armor, connection over safety, love over fear. Outside, in the hallway where this had all begun with surveillance and secrets, Emma looked up at both of them and smiled. "Can we get ice cream now? You both look like you need ice cream." Alan and Janice looked at each other and laughed, real laughter, the kind that comes after surviving something impossible. "Yes," Janice said, crouching down to Emma's level. "Ice cream sounds perfect." They left Watson Technologies together that afternoon, walking into whatever came next, risks, complications, beautiful uncertainty, as partners.